building the WingnutTech LED controller. These are the parts that come in the kit. We have the pressure transducer, the Arduino microcontroller, the PCB that everything mounts to. We have the header pins for input and output. We have the momentary switches to configure it, and we also have a popsicle stick that's included in the kit. This is for helping space the pins underneath. Some other things you'll need are soldering iron and solder, as well as I like to use a pair of tweezers. It helps me pick up the switches to mount them on the board. You don't have to, my fingers are a little large, so it makes it easier. So let's get started. The first thing we want to do is open up the pressure transducer. Everything that is static sensitive is in a anti-static bag. So the first thing we do is take the header pin for the pressure transducer, and what you want to do is take the PCB, and where the side that says WingnutTech.com, you want to flip it over to the other side, and you'll actually see it's marked Nano and BMP 280. The BMP pins, these 6 pins here, is where this will mount. So put the header pins in those 6 holes like that. Take your pressure transducer with the writing up. You can see that the pins are marked here. You don't want the component side up, you want the silk screen with the letters up. Go ahead and slide that over the 6 pins. I use the popsicle stick to rest that on so that the pins don't get pushed up into the board. And then I will solder these pins in place here. Okay. Once that's done, hold your finger on it, flip the board over, set it back down, and we'll solder the other side, those 6 pins. Okay, you can see those 6 pins are soldered on the bottom and on the top. So the next thing we're going to do is open up the microcontroller. And the microcontroller comes with its own header pins. It also comes with this extra 6-pin programming set. We don't need this. You can throw this away. So the next thing we're going to do is set the popsicle stick between the 2 rows of pins. And in fact, it's not going to balance there, so what we can do is just break this in 2. We can set one under here, and then another one under where the 2 rows of pins go. That'll hold it nice and flat. And the long side of the pins go down into the board. Honestly, it doesn't matter electrically which way it goes. This just makes assembly easier. But you put those down into the boards and then set the microcontroller on top. You want the USB port facing this side of the board. Once you have that in place, I like to solder each corner first. That just helps hold everything together. and then I'll go through and solder the rest of the pins. Okay, the top side is finished. And the reason that I want you to set the pins in place in the PCB and then solder the Arduino onto the tops of the pins is so that the pins are then in line. Everything lines up. If you were to try to solder these on separately, you know, on the Arduino itself, setting them up, you know, like this on the board or whatever, the pins could be angled slightly one way or the other, and then they would not fit. You'd have to struggle to get them to line up going into the PCB. But because we put everything together first and then soldered everything, the pins are all perfectly in line. So now we can flip it over and solder the bottom side. And again, I like to do the corners first. It just holds everything together so it's not bumping around as you're doing the rest of the pins. But it's really your preference. All right, and those are all soldered in place. Next thing we want to do is solder the header pins in. We'll start with the 15-pin connector for the outputs. Press that onto the PCB board. I like to give it a slight angle up away from the board so that there's room to get your connectors in. Sometimes if it's too low, the edge of the connector will hit the PCB, so I like to angle it back a little bit like this. And just lay it down and solder. Again, I like to solder two corners first. It just holds everything in line while you solder the rest of the pins and things aren't moving around on you. Okay, once those 15 pins are done, you can take this 6-pin connector for the inputs and put it in the PCB. Same thing, I like to angle it up away from the board just a little bit. Give it some clearance. Okay. Now that's finished. I am going to use this toothpick and place it under this corner of the board just to give a little support while I'm putting these switches on. But that's the next thing, is these two switches. So I like to tin these pads first. So just put a little solder in each one, just so that it's bubbling up a little bit over the hole. And once you've got each one soldered, just pick up your switch, lay it over the first set of pads, hold it in place, and then just put your soldering iron on top of one of the pins and hold it there, and you'll see it suddenly sink into the solder. Once it does, remove the heat, hold it there for a second, and that one's done. And then we'll go through and same way, just hold your soldering iron on one of the pins until you see the solder pad underneath melt into it. And all 4 of those pins are soldered. Do the same thing for the next switch. Hold it in place. Apply a little heat to one of the pins. remove the heat, let it solidify, and then now that that's held in place, just go through and do the remaining 3 pins. And you're all done. That is the assembly of the WingnutTech LED controller.